Hello, I'm Tom with a cold.
And I'm Hannah. Welcome to the Digital Behaviour Podcast, a podcast about human behaviour in the digital world.
In this podcast, we help you to understand what drives online behaviour, how we can measure this, and the impact on the wider world.
And today we're going to be meeting Jenny Novitzky, a senior digital producer at Love Productions. Over the past years, she worked on social media content for the Great British Bake Off.
This is going to be a fascinating episode. Let's meet Jenny. Well, welcome to the podcast, Jenny. It sounds like you've got an amazing job, a dream job for many people, actually. Would you mind just introducing yourself and telling us a bit about what you do?
Of course. Yeah. Thanks so much for having me. I'm Jenny. So I'm a senior digital producer with a television production company called Love Productions. They make shows like The Great British Bake Off, The Great Pottery Throwdown, Sewing Bee, The Piano, and also lots of other new format shows that we come up with each year. And me and my team, I've got a brilliant team, and we look after all aspects of the social media campaigns that help promote those shows. So we look after every aspect really that falls under that. We do the strategy, the branding, the tone of voice. We film on set with talent and contributors, creating all the content, copywriting, posting, communication, and then we also look after digital welfare.
And is it as an amazing job as it's? I mean, people often talk about, if you actually become a footballer, for example, that would be my dream job. It's not actually as great as it seems, because suddenly you have to go into training and you have to go and play a match. But is it as amazing job as students might see it? Students listening, for example.
It is in lots of ways. I mean, a job is always a job, so there's always that aspect. But I think it's a really lovely mix of, you get to be creative every day, you get to be very fun and silly. I think lots of marketing and branding, obviously there's a serious edge, but particularly for a TV show like this, you get to kind of really play around, and most adults don't get to do that every day. So that's a real joy. You get to go to set, you get to meet all the kind of, contributors, the participants in the show, and the people presenting and the judges, and you can eat the cake as well. That's what I get asked most. Can you eat the cake? Yes. Yeah.
Well, that's fantastic. Jenny, just welcome from me as well, and thanks for being here. You sort of talk about social media as quite, social media as one thing. Obviously, there are lots of different channels. Can you tell us a little bit about, the importance of sort of adjusting the content, maybe also which channels you really like working on, what the differences are, because that's something, not just students, I think listeners in particular are quite sort of keen to understand if there's a difference if you're posting something on Instagram versus TikTok, for example.
Yeah, so I think that's really key for us, and something that we do more and more is that we have really different strategies for each platform, and they're quite specific on how to approach them separately. For us, we've got lots of stats from previous campaigns, from everything that we've posted, and we have quite a kind of high-tech data analysis platform, so that really helps us to create that really specific strategy. So we can think about what our priority platforms are, what kind of content the people on those platforms like, where they're based, what age they are, how much to post, when to post, really kind of go quite granular into that. And we follow that through, always leaving room for surprises and kind of fun things. But yeah, we are very specific on that kind of strategy for each platform. I think for us, it's really shifted, and probably for most brands, that X was our key platform for a long time. And it's kind of done a 180, and that now it's much more of a lower priority. Lots of brands I'm seeing, particularly in the last few months, for obvious reasons, are leaving X, and we still find that it's an important news outlet. So press look at X, and that's something that we kind of need to keep up. But also, it is still a news source, and there are still people who are kind of there in the moment watching. So that's something that we really gain a lot from. We gain a lot of audience insight of what they like about the show, who they like, what kind of moments they found really big. So that sometimes sways what we post as well, because we're thinking, oh, people really love that sort of moment. Let's definitely click that out and post it on other platforms. I think for us, Instagram is really big. Facebook is still really big. It's not growing as much, but often it has the biggest audience. TikTok is big and is growing the most. So it varies across the different shows and where they're based and the ages and all that kind of thing. But yeah, Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok are probably the biggest. And I think for us, creating video content is still one of the most important things. I know a few years ago, your strategy could just be kind of make reels and make TikToks, and that could almost be it. And that's not the case anymore. It's kind of much more refined than that. But for us, I suppose video is our main product that we're selling because we're a TV show. So we have that source naturally, which is really helpful. But also it's one of the key ways I think that you can reach beyond your own audience. Videos are one of the main things that get served to people that aren't already following you. So yeah, that's really helpful for us.
This is really, really interesting. And I think Facebook is one of the ones that, in particular, my students are quite surprised about because they're not on Facebook. They're the younger 20s, or at least not the ones that I come across. And so I, continue to stress that actually it is the biggest social media platform. So you can't dismiss it. If you think about the content in particular, and you kind of said obviously video, moving motions is really one of the most important things for you guys. If you really look at now on a more granular level, sort of Facebook versus TikTok, for example, because I do think there are different audiences, how would you adjust the content to sort of fit one or the other?
Yeah, so on a sort of quite simple level, I think Facebook is obviously an older audience. It's slightly older, so we wouldn't lean into very niche internet-y references or trending kind of ideas as much. We might post them if the content works well on its own without the reference. If kind of standalone, that trend or idea still works, but normally it's quite straight. We also would really avoid on Facebook anything that might cause controversy, not necessarily the content, but if we're saying a caption or something like that people might misunderstand, Facebook is the kind of platform where you really want to avoid that because they will misunderstand it and they'll let you know. So it's quite important. It's also important to kind of moderate comments, particularly on Facebook. I think you really have to be quite hot on that. And we've this year, for the first time, we've always had guidelines about needing to create safe spaces, but we've posted those quite publicly and pinned them to the page and tried to be more active in kind of getting rid of people that aren't following those. TikTok is still a bit of a playground, but I think as a brand, we have found that just clips of the show work really well. Behind the scenes content, people love that. It can be harder for us to create more sort of natural, fun little videos that you might be able to make with your friends because it's hard for them to feel like the brand, but still feel fun and authentic. So we tend to do a bit of a mix of the show clipped out, specially recorded fun games and videos, and then just kind of something that really works well. It's just like behind the scenes stills as carousels, like they always do well on TikTok, which is really interesting. You think it should be all video, but it's worth playing around.
I was going to ask you actually about how much of the content comes from the show itself, because obviously I had a look at some of the content you've generated, and some of it is clearly clips from the show, as you mentioned. But how much creativity do you have in determining? I guess it depends on each show, does it? And the production team on each show will give you some advice on what they feel comfortable with in terms of whether you go behind the scenes or not, or whether you just take clips from the show or not, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, for all the shows, we're lucky that we can go behind the scenes for all of them. They do all have different levels of how much they want to show, and it changes each year. So we've shown more and more of Bake Off particularly. That's probably always the one where we can push things a bit further first, although also always the one that we have to protect as well the most. But this year, for example, we interviewed lovely Gina, who does lots of the washing up. So that's something that people have been asking for since I started 7 years ago. So it's like really something people want to see. And for the first time we did that, and it was really nice. So I think it's sort of, it's a bit on us to show that it works. And this year we found that a lot of the stuff that we specially recorded was the most popular content. We could see in the comments and from the stats that it was really doing well. So that's kind of our basis for arguing why we should be there.
Yeah. And obviously one of the things you need to do is then adjust the content between platforms, because what you post as a reel might be different to what you post on a different platform. Twitter, for example, I think you did mention Twitter earlier on, is that you use it as it's one of the platforms that you use. So can you think of any examples of where adjusting content has worked particularly well, where you've changed it for a particular platform and it's had a particular appeal, and maybe it's actually had more appeal on the platform that you adjusted it for than it did on other platforms where it actually looked quite similar?
Yeah, I think that's something that I really think about, and it probably seems quite small changes to other people, but for me it's something I'm always considering, both in terms of the asset, so the still or the video that we're posting, and the copy, and when we're posting as well. All of those things kind of play into your knowledge of the platform and when it's going to perform the best. So as a kind of clear example, Alison Hammond, our lovely presenter, fell off a workbench this series, and it was just this great moment. Everyone loved it, and we knew that they would love it. It was brilliant. So we posted it a lot of different ways, much more than we normally would for one moment, but we initially went as a GIF on X and Threads, and then we put the straight clip pretty much everywhere kind of in the moment, because it wasn't a spoiler, but we knew it would be a water cooler moment that people were talking about. Then we kind of made a montage of Alison and lots of cakes falling over. So it was this sort of full montage, and kind of tied it to the American audience with autumn, fall. So that was a tenuous link, but it helped kind of get that audience too. And we posted it when we knew they were around. Then we kind of also got some audience tweets and comments, and we made a little gallery of those and posted that on Instagram, and that did really well. So it's almost like a feedback loop of people enjoying it and then enjoying the enjoying of it, which is interesting. That's something we find works quite well. And for all of those, we'll change the caption as well. So I think I won't go too much into it, but you can be kind of spikier on Instagram. You don't have to provide as much context. TikTok, you really need to think about SEO. So you need to put kind of names in there, the show in there, the key things that you want people to know, while still being as pithy as you can. And X, you don't really need to provide that context. Just short and sweet is great. Threads, you want to start a conversation. So you're kind of can't be quite as bait as just always asking a question, but you're kind of, it's on that road.
I guess the thing about social media is some of what goes viral is just serendipitous. You've got no idea sometimes what's going to take off and what isn't. So have there been examples of, if you're happy to talk about this, examples of where you thought something was going to be bigger than it actually was, and where you've tried to do something that actually it didn't take off? I mean, I'm not saying it flopped, but it perhaps wasn't as successful as you thought it might have been based on previous content that you made in that format.
I think moments from the show almost always do well. And we're quite lucky. I think actually our engagement is still quite high, whereas I know lots of people are seeing a real hit. So we've been lucky that it's kind of, well, lucky and hard work, I suppose. But I think generally we find that trending audio, it's not so specific, but trending audio is really hard for us. And it's something we've tried to do quite a few times. But because it's harder for us to kind of lip sync, we just are matching it with a clip. And often, obviously, people are listening to things on mute. That kind of stuff is tricky. And anything very trending, you have to really think about. I think for me, something I've always got in mind is how can the audience understand this and be entertained quickest, most efficiently, without several layers of having to get what it is, especially if they're not following you, so they don't know who you are or what you're posting. So I think sometimes when something's trending or zeitgeisty, it's too many layers of understanding for people to get it.
Jenny, when you think about sort of posting something, and can we talk a bit about timing? So do you feel like, you're posting mainly when the show is on, or, later? Because we've briefly talked about this earlier, but people don't seem to be that satisfied anymore with just watching TV. Instead, they watching TV, they might have their tablet or their phone in their hands, scrolling while they're watching. Is that something that you're observing? So when do you post? Do you see that people are actually watching television as well as scrolling on their phone? And how can you sort of work with that, I guess, when it comes to content creation?
Yeah, it really has changed, and is changing, I think. We used to really post a lot more while people were watching. So we have what we call a watch along, and we post while the show is airing, and we're there and we're live and we're responding to what people are talking about. And I think that's really important. And for me, I find it really helps me, like, my creativity, because you pick up on sort of what the mood is and what the conversation is, and that's very helpful. But we are finding that it doesn't matter as much posting in the moment, particularly on the platforms outside of X. And I think that's probably a mixture of algorithm, the mysterious algorithm serving content as and when and if it wants to, rather than exactly when you're posting it. And also, I suppose, of course, people are watching more on demand, and we have quite a large American audience, and they're getting the show a few days later in the week. So it is a real balance, and I do think about it quite a lot, of wanting to capture the moment and knowing the engagement will be higher if you can capture the moment, but not wanting to spoil things, not wanting to kind of ruin moments of people, and also not kind of overloading everything, because I do think what we find is regular posting is very important. So if we posted everything all in one go, one evening, and then nothing for the rest of the week, I don't think that would help us algorithmically either.
And do you assume that the audience that you're targeting is watching the program, or perhaps there are people that you appeal to on certain platforms that actually are not regular viewers, maybe not there and then anyway, sort of live, they're not live viewers, so that does it matter to you whether they actually are regular viewers of the program or not?
It definitely matters, because I think our main goal is to make people watch the show, so that's always our sort of marketing aim, or at least love the brand and then hopefully watch the show. But we do think about if there aren't people watching the show. So we do more and more of a kind of always on strategy of content from previous series, or kind of things that we have in the bank that we post at the same time. A, to kind of boost KPIs, but B, also to lure those people in and to get them to watch the show as it's airing. So it's a little bit of a mix of both.
Do you measure if they are, I mean, obviously you say, you've got lots of analytics to see what works, when's a good time. Do you measure this KPI of how many people you have sort of gotten, from social media because of your content, then watching the show? Is that something that I mean, obviously not necessarily, by just watching, but I guess sort of consumer research, or, do you do surveys like that to really try to determine in how far your social media content has an impact on the extra viewers?
Long story short, no. There isn't an easy way for us to tell. So I think it would have to be kind of questionnaires or things like that, and that would be quite tricky for us. We can tell if people have applied from the social media. That's an easy kind of thing that we can figure out within the platform, but we can't really tell if people are watching because they've seen the social media, or even how many of the people following us are watching. All we can kind of do is compare our number of followers with the number of views, and the number of views is a slightly different conversation, but the number of people who are viewing a show is always quite hard to tell as well. It's a bit of a guessing game.
Yeah. I guess just with a sort of cynical marketing hat on, do you have to think about what stage of the funnel you're targeting people at, whether you're targeting people who are going to become people who watch the program, or whether you're targeting people at the bottom of the funnel who actually already are addicts of Bake Off or whichever other program you're promoting at that time? Do you have to think about that, or as a social media content creator, can you sort of be free to be creative and artistic and not worry so much about the funnel? Or what kind of direction do you get on that?
All marketers have the funnel, I think. Yes, we do, particularly actually sometimes for the other shows. For Pottery at the moment, which has just started airing, it's something I'm really thinking about, because I know that there's a really big pottery community, and quite a young pottery community, especially on TikTok. And I am sort of trying to lure them in to follow us and to watch the show, which they might be doing already, but we don't know. But there's definitely that sort of big untapped market. I think Bake Off is a little bit different, because probably most people are kind of vaguely aware of it in this country. So if they want to watch it, perhaps they already are. Obviously, we can show them really entertaining clips and get them excited about it and be like, oh, it's amazing this year, you definitely need to watch. But they have that brand awareness already. So we can post recipes and beautiful cakes and things like that, but it's not necessarily going to lure them in the same way. I think for an American audience, that's still possible. And there's still lots of people discovering it. So that kind of helps with the funnel. So yeah.
Can I ask then, this is something maybe from my own experience, being German and having moved to England 12, 13 years ago. And I didn't understand the Great British Bake Off, right? I didn't understand why it was such a big deal here. My husband made me watch it, and I do enjoy it and I do love it. But initially, as a foreigner, it is a really hard concept. Somebody tries to explain that people are baking, and it's like this phenomena that, every British person loves. Do you see that in the States in particular? And are there any ways that you're using, I guess, maybe that sort of, twinkle about, being British in your social media to get them to watch it? Or what's your strategy, to enter, I guess, foreign markets that don't have that, understanding of the Great British Bake Off?
Well, firstly, I'll say that there are so many markets that have their different versions, their different shows. We did a presentation for kind of all the different international versions, and there was everything. Azerbaijan Bake Off. I was talking about memes to Azerbaijan Bake Off. It was very interesting. But so yeah, they have their own different versions. But yes, we definitely play on the Britishness, and we do that more and more as we see a bigger and bigger American audience. Obviously, you don't want to alienate the existing British audience, but I did things like a UK to US translation. Not every episode, but kind of every one where it sort of allowed for it, which was explaining different phrases and terms or even references, Guy Fawkes Night, that they just wouldn't really have any concept of. And those were really simple assets. They were just carousels and just almost grabs from the episode and like dictionary references, but they did really, really well. I think because it was so specific of who it was aiming for and why.
I think that is a really sort of nice introduction for my next question, actually, because we had a brief chat about sort of earlier about, the content being less polished, that you see a trends of sort of, I think you mentioned it as sort of chaos internet, or, just can you tell us a little bit more about sort of content in itself and how you see that has or is changing at the moment?
Yeah, definitely. I think authenticity has been a keyword for quite a long time. And we know that audiences really look for authenticity, which is obviously hard as a brand because, of course, you're selling something. So it's hard to kind of get that exactly right. As I said before, we've definitely moved into posting more behind the scenes content and that kind of peek behind the curtain, which everyone seems to really, really love. And that's sort of our way of being authentic, I think, and showing that. In terms of chaos internet, I suppose we've seen it for a while, and internet's always been a bit chaos, but we definitely see your kind of Duolingos and Ryanair's leaning into that weird internet style and that working very well. And I think the internet as a whole is very in on the joke and in on trends, and they quite like weird things, moodang, these niche references that kind of ignite and then go away again. I suppose because we're all on our phones so much that allows those trends to spread very quickly and very rapidly. For us, it's definitely a balance because we are sort of almost the heritage brand. So we can't go bananas with it. But I think because people understand the beats of the show and what's happening, we almost have a bit more room to play in because we've kind of got that foundation set. So we can go a little bit crazy. And we're definitely doing that a bit more. And I find that people get it a bit more than they used to. We've kind of done it since the beginning. So we'd always have quite weird little Doctor Who references and stuff like that. It's sort of 15 years ago. But yeah, you see the audience appreciating it more and more.
Have you got, Jenny, because you talked about sort of moderating the comments to a certain extent, and they've got some rules that they have to follow when it comes to what they can say and can't say. Is it quite strict for you with regards to, as you said, it is a heritage brand, there's a lot sort of that, a lot of expectations, I guess, around the brand as strong as especially the Great British Bake Off, but I guess some of the other shows as well. Are there sort of strict guidelines for you, or is it something because you've done it for so long, they sort of trust you with, whatever you think is going to work?
I'd say because I've been there for a long time, I'm probably at the level where I understand what will work and know what the welfare issues might be, where the worries are. My exec, Annabelle, is brilliant, and she's the sort of brand guardian, we call it. So if I have anything where I'm not sure, I think it's fit on the line, I'll send it to her and she'll kind of either send it even higher to check, or she'll say yes or no and kind of figure it out. And obviously we have to be quite sensitive, A, what's going on in the world, but B, we do try and think about what's going on with all the people in the show and the talent and any kind of sensitivities that we're aware of behind the scenes. So sometimes there's a few kind of different things going into it of what we can and can't post.
Are you allowed to sort of, when it comes to, I know we talked about, presenters, but also the audience itself, do you try to stay away from making it too personal? Sort of, do you try to keep the, overarching idea of what the program is about? Or are you quite sort of happy to hone in? I know you talked about the lady who's doing the dishes. Did you say the dishes, for example? Is that something you try to stay away from, or do you like to make it quite personal?
It depends, and it's changing, and that's probably been the answer for everything. So Bake Off, we are showing more. We did, lovely Jeannie who does the dishes, and we also had our brilliant wardrobe supervisor as well. So we kind of did interviews with those crew members, and we've shown crew a bit more in games and things like that. So we're kind of showing some of those behind the scenes, more individual personal narratives. we as the kind of people that create the content haven't really been front and center, and you see that lots of brands are doing that. So they have the social media people, because it is easier if you've got someone that can mime things or can kind of be the face of the brand. We've not really done that loads yet. You can glimpse me in certain bits, but not front and center. So I think that's something that we're kind of thinking about, weighing up whether it works or not for us.
Mm-hmm.
I guess we're at the beginning of a new year, and as we sort of look ahead and think about trends and things that you might be doing with future content, maybe this year and beyond, actually, are there any particular trends that you see developing in content creation generally? Anything that you think you might be doing more of in the not to give anything away to do with Bake Off necessarily, but generally, I know you look after lots of different brands. Some of them are TV programs and some of them aren't, but in terms of the sort of styles and formats of the content that you're producing, can you see any particular any trends emerging?
I was trying to have a think about that, and I really wanted to say, and I thought I was going to say that I think the negativity of social media, which is still quite paramount, I think it's going to break, or I thought it was going to break, and kind of moderation was going to come in a bit more, and we'd see a bit more sort of a friendlier spaces. But obviously recent announcements by Meta that they're completely getting rid of moderation, that shows that I'm completely wrong. So it's lucky we didn't record this a few days earlier. But I guess what we might see instead is maybe a splitting into two different spheres. So we might have a much more moderated space. I don't know if it's Blue Sky, but something else, but quite kind of heavily moderated spaces, and then more sort of Wild West spaces where anything goes. And I suppose that mirrors perhaps what's happening in society, a bit of a division. So yeah, I think that might happen. In terms of more specifically sort of content creation and marketing, I am seeing, and I think it's to do with TikTok working so well as a search engine and as an algorithm, serving you what you're interested in rather than who you're following. So I think I'm seeing lots more of the audience almost acting as content creators and creating really funny, like amazing content that I think is just brilliant, and obviously is authentic because it is from a person and they've just done it as a passion because they love it. And everyone's just getting so sort of skilled at creating content and really switched on about what will work. I think there's going to be something around that sort of balance and that interplay of how the brands work with the audience. And it's not necessarily taking the content and making it an ad, because immediately you undercut the authenticity. But there's something about it being a bit more of a conversation, I think, that TikTok really opens up and allows.
Yeah.
I think there is a lot of, trending that you see, not just, in sort of practitioner actual social media, but also in research, that just shows that the audience in the internet, the large audience, has a massive sort of impact on what's being created, what's being shown. And I think especially with, as you said, Meta announcing that the fact checker is going to disappear, they said, they're going to rely on collective moderation instead, by the audience. So again, putting some of that responsibility, not just for sort of user generated content, but also that moderation back into the hands of us, of the user, which I think is quite interesting. But Tom, sorry, you want to say something?
Yeah, I'm just going to ask. I guess we can't really let you get away without asking about AI. I was just wondering. I guess AI is never going to stand in a tent making content for Bake Off. But does AI play any role in what you do at the moment, or can you see it? I guess you've got a career ahead of you that is going to be probably involving all sorts of technology. Who knows what's around the corner? But AI is likely to be a big part of that. Can you see a role for AI in sort of maybe helping you to edit content, or anything else that it might be useful to help you with?
Yes, it's still quite controversial. I think for our audience, we have posted things that are we don't post much AI at all, or much where it's entirely AI. But we've posted a couple of little bits, and in the last few months, I'd say the audience is very against it. So it's really interesting. If it's very clearly AI, they don't like it, and that's really fair enough. There's obviously a big kind of reaction. But like you said, our designers are definitely able to use it as just a bit of a shortcut tool sometimes to help them kind of cut things out from a background on a video, things like that are very time consuming if they can't use that tool. I think it will get, as we all know, just trickier and trickier the more and more believable it is, and the harder it is for people to kind of tell the difference. But exactly what you said, Tom, hopefully it just becomes a tool to enable us to work more quickly and to kind of get rid of some of those mundane jobs rather than the kind of creative force behind what we're posting.
One last one, just because you said at the beginning, and we have quite a few listeners who are students, undergraduate and postgraduate as well. But as we said, seems to be a dream job. It's fantastic sort of work that you do. And I did sort of talk over you earlier when you said it's a bit of luck how successful you are. Some of the posts, I do think it's, your work and, the effort you put into it, I guess, and, understanding your audience. But is there any sort of advice you would give to students or even, people in the industry of how to get into, I guess, if it's, television, for example, but particularly your area that you would say that they can do to have a better chance? Or how to go about it, I guess, if this is something that they're particularly sort of interested in?
Yeah, I think I have an unconventional route, which probably everyone says. So I started out as a writer and a performer, and I did copywriting and then sort of moved into social media. TV is an interesting sphere because people who work as crew in TV have quite a structured pathway. So they will work as runners and then they'll head up the ranks and go into different zones. But it's a really clear pathway. Whereas social media for TV is a bit more of a strange world. Who knows who's running it? Sometimes it's an agency, sometimes it's a channel, sometimes it's a production company. It's not a clear route at all. I think with any job, what you can do is you can always kind of contact different places and say you love their work. Can you do a bit of work with them? Is there any sort of runner scheme or internship scheme? I think if you can really kind of think about your editing skills, your video editing skills. I say that as someone who isn't very good at video editing. I've got a fairly basic level, but that is more and more important. And particularly for TV, social media, I would really work on that and practice. And as well as being able to do it sort of in-app on your phone, I think it's still very important to be able to do something on Premiere Pro or a different bit of editing software like that. So yeah, I think working on those skills would really help.
And I guess just having a portfolio or a CV that shows that you've done it, even if it's for yourself or for your dad's company or something, would be useful, I suppose, to be able to show that you can do these things, even if it hasn't been in the past for a TV show or a celebrity or whatever it might be. Yeah,
I think the number of people's businesses around that you could help by helping them with their social media, I imagine, is almost limitless. So yeah, I'm sure you could find someone that you could build your portfolio with by helping them out and creating brilliant content for them.
Yeah.
Perfect. And Jenny, if our listeners want to sort of see what you're doing for your for the different TV productions, how is best for them to go about it? Just follow the different shows on the social media channels, or what would you recommend?
Yeah, follow the different shows. Please follow the different shows. At British Bake Off. Oh, I won't remember all the different handles, but Bake Off, Pottery Throwdown, Sewing Bee, Piano. Yeah, have a little follow, and hopefully we can inspire you with what we're making.
Tom, we can put that in the caption as well, can't we, for the podcast, actually, just for people if they want to take a look there.
And of course, you're on LinkedIn, so people might want to connect with you on LinkedIn.
Please do. That would be brilliant. I always want to connect with people, so that would be great.
Jenny, it was brilliant talking to you.
Thanks so much. Thank you.
Thanks very much.